Hello everyone, I'm Natalie Mansotti and this is my final presentation on the architect Santiago Calatrava and form of the Italian Futurists. So during the fascist reign in Italy, the Futurist Manifesto was written by F.T. Marinetti to propose a change in the lifestyle of the population. In the manifesto, Marinetti emphasized ideals such as carelessness, rash and daring actions, and that beauty exists only in struggle. He urged the young public that the time period they existed in was absolute, that time and space died yesterday. Young futurist artists communicated these ideals in their art by focusing their compositions on the dynamism of bodies, noise, heat, and the smell of the metropolis. Their style was influenced by earlier Cubists. These Cubists came about when artists wanted to show every plane in a three-dimensional object or figure instead of perspective. They wanted to emphasize the flat quality of the canvas, so they analyzed the planes of a subject and rearranged the pieces into the ideal dynamic composition. In Elasticity by Umberto Boccioni, you can clearly see this influence emerge from the canvas. Futurists were also fascinated by machinery and its motion. In The Dynamism of Dog on a Leash, you can see just how fascinated they are by the movement of the limbs of the dog as well as of the woman, and the skirt and the feet, and as they go on their walk. So they sought to portray the violence of the machine age even through architecture and sculpture. In unique forms of continuity in space, you can just see the planes are shifted, as if there is some sort of wind or some sort of power in front of the sculpture, pushing the skin away from it. So in architecture, Antonio Santaella wrote the Manifesto of Futurist Architecture in 1914 with the approval of Marinetti. Some even say that Santaella actually came up with part of the Futurist Manifesto in architecture before Marinetti even considered this ideal in art. In this Manifesto of Architecture, he renounced every classical ideal existing in architecture. He stressed the importance of improving buildings as quickly as the technology that continued to surface. He called for architects to use new shapes, new lines, and new materials. He said it must be new, just our state of mind is new. He believed that we should not use new materials to recreate architecture of old, but new architecture. That we should create every aspect of a building and city like we see in a machine. So for example, in these two pieces over here, they're both included in La Città Nuova that he came up with. And it was basically, these perspectives just show all these ideals that he had in a city, that everything that was already in a metropolis could be built in one building. So also, every inner part would be moving and working towards the whole of the structure. The whole must reach higher than before, so thus it would become a tall skyscraper and would be supported by the inner structure of the building. And then this inner structure, usually hidden, must become the new skin. And he said that architecture should be dynamic and focus on the rawness of material, and it should demonstrate the present and should be destroyed if something new arises. This to him was futurist architecture. So as we continue with our analysis of form in architecture in during the futurist movement and contemporary, the architect that I will be talking about is Santiago Calatrava, and the way that he emphasizes movement and structure and beauty along with sculpture in his buildings. So Santiago Calatrava is a Spanish architect and engineer who specializes in folding and moving architecture. His research in architecture kinetics shows in many ways so many of his pieces and his sketch studies. He is very interested in the way a structural form can move and yet be very beautiful and sculptural. While movement can become very technical, he succeeds over and over again in creating these modus operandi with grace, form, beauty, and functionality. We can see this train of thought in hundreds of his cahiers d'idées or sketchbooks. In these, he visually shows the process he goes through to create asymmetrical forms that move and have the one most important movable joint. Calatrava has said in a notebook that architecture is made from the inside out. He suggests how important it is to focus not only on the beauty and for everyone sees, but also on the hidden structure and mechanism that allows the form to come into being. So for example, this turning torso sketch is his most famous sketches, because he starts with the form of the human body turning and then turns it into an apartment building, just in a conceptual apartment building, which is incredible because it has this joint coming up the side that basically holds the structure while it's turning and still allows it to be buildable, which is incredible. Nevertheless, while he is so structural, he still believes that architecture and sculpture are rivers in which the same water runs. But Calatrava does take sculpture to a different scale, supported by his love for motion. So over here in this one, you can see that he gets a lot of his stuff from nature. Just looking at this airport in Lyon, France, that he took from an eye and just developed it so you could see the movement, and you could see kind of like where he starts thinking about the hinges. So we will be talking about this piece a little bit more in detail a little later. So now I'm going to start here, just two of the main pieces that are very interesting: the turning torso, which is already built in Sweden, and then the Lyon airport in France, which are both very in tune with nature and are based on very natural concepts. So now I'm going to continue to comparing and contrasting some futurist pieces with Calatrava's work. I really want to talk about the versatility of Calatrava's abilities. He hand draws his concepts, finds clear structural solutions to his concepts, and by showing the structural skin instead of hiding it, his final structures are very dynamic and sculptural. So this first piece is, I'm comparing it to the dynamism of the dog, just how it's so interesting how this door to this warehouse is almost so similar that it becomes this flat plane into this incredible movable object. So he actually utilized raw aluminum material for texture and light. And the movement in the individual pieces, but also in the whole, is very responsive. And Calatrava saw this as a study of kinetic planes on a facade. And so while it does turn into a 3D object, originally it's this plane object that has this movement as it's pulled up and turns into this extremely kinetic facade, which is incredible. The next piece that I'm going to talk about is the Alan Lambert Gallery in Toronto. So he built this in 2004, and one of Calatrava's themes in all of his work is just the fact that he starts out with bridging certain things. And along with his theme of bridges, Calatrava creates a connection between these two civic buildings in downtown Toronto. He uses the raw structure to emphasize the space in between and also provide a cover for climate in Toronto, because it can get very cold during the winter. And so I kind of started to think of this structure as a parallel to the Città Nuova Hotel in that St. Elia came up with, this concept that he came up with, just how like the structure is the skin of the building that contains all of the space in between. And I just thought it was incredible how both of these architects, whether it was a concept and something that was built, how you can just see it and see the utility in both of these. So the last one that I will be talking about is the Tenerife Concert Hall. This is actually one of my favorite pieces of Calatrava. It is one of the most dynamic works that he has. And this concert hall is a combination of dynamic structure in a space and the curved arm reaching over the body of the concert hall really emphasizes the important part of the building. And honestly, it just suggests like an infinite arch of movement, of continuity over the space, which is honestly one of the most important things that I see. Just the movement is just so clear that you can see the circulation of going in the building, and that you can see how the main body is just almost sheltered by this arm of movement, which is incredible. And I compared it to unique forms of continuity in space, just because in both of these you can clearly see the movement. You can clearly see how this movement is affected by outside forces, and how sculptural it is too, because in futurist art, just the movement is just so important, and it's just great to be able to replicate it to something that is quite contemporary. And so really, for both, I would just say futurist and in contemporary architecture now, like you can just see the dynamism in the movement. And so in conclusion, Italian futurists had the right idea when it came down to the evolution of art and architecture. However, it didn't really have to be violent to represent movement, because a lot of Italian futurists did believe that things had to be violent to represent this dynamism in this, present time and space. But Calatrava's pieces are magnificent sculptures that define space and motion, yet his concepts are based on the movement of beauty in nature. He did believe that beauty relied on the single human person that was inhabiting this space, whereas the futurists believe that man was transient and had a certain time on Earth, and that his time was done. And so while all these pieces are very structural and very sculptural and interesting to look at based on the motion, they're still very different on the concepts that lie behind it. So thank you guys so much for listening to my presentation, and I really hope you enjoyed it, and it just posed some interesting questions. And if you have anything to ask me, just shoot me an email. Thank you.